And our top story this morning, at any moment, President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin will be getting on a phone call to talk about ending the war in Ukraine. President Trump also plans to speak to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and NATO leaders today. Now, all of this is happening as Russia intensifies drone strikes in Ukraine. Ukraine says Russia launched its largest drone attack since the war began, with hundreds of strikes overnight. The White House says President Trump's goal here is to reach a peace agreement as soon as possible.
Well, I think, again, we'll see how the call goes, and the president has made it clear his goal is to see a ceasefire and to see this conflict come to an end. And he's grown weary and frustrated with both sides of the conflict. The president and his team have put an enormous amount of effort in solving this very complicated war that, again, began because of the last administration's weakness.
And we have team coverage for you this hour with our Natalie Brand at the White House and senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer live for us from London. Natalie, I want to start with you and talk about what President Trump is expected to say during this call. And also, what do you think his approach is going to be this time?
Chanel, good to be with you. We got a little bit of insight here from Vice President JD Vance, who spoke to reporters while traveling back from Rome. And he said he thinks President Trump is really going to ask President Putin if he's serious about these negotiations, if he has a strategy for how to unwind the war. And Vance also saying that the U.S. position, the Trump administration's position, has been to say to Russia that there are economic benefits to thawing relations between Russia and the rest of the world, but that those benefits will not be seen if Russia continues to kill innocent people. Again, that's according to the vice president speaking to reporters this morning. He also said that the U.S. wants to see outcomes here, that there's been this impasse. We saw, direct talks happen between Ukraine and Russia late last week, but the key players weren't there. So again, the question becomes in this call, can President Trump move the ball forward? The White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt saying that we will have readouts from these series of calls. Keep in mind, it's not only the Russian president that President Trump will be speaking to, but then later President Zelenskyy and also NATO members. Chanel.
And Natalie, we know that timing here is so key. I want to play for you and our viewers part of what Secretary of State Marco Rubio said yesterday on Face the Nation.
We don't want to be involved in this process of just endless talks. There has to be some progress, some movement forward. Ultimately, one of the things that could help break this logjam, perhaps the only thing that can, is a direct conversation between President Trump and Vladimir Putin.
So, Natalie, I'm just thinking out loud here. I mean, if these phone calls today don't work out, what, if anything, can the Trump administration do to try to secure a deal in the future?
Well, we heard from President Trump last week that he thinks that progress can be made by speaking directly to Putin, meeting him in person. Obviously, we're starting with this phone call. Caroline Leavitt, during the press briefing, which wrapped a short time ago, was asked, would the president be up to meeting Russian President Putin in person, and she indicated that he would be, but also made clear, let's see how this phone call goes first. Another thing that we know the administration is watching, following those talks in Turkey, both sides are supposed to come up with a document, a proposal, some details about what they envision for a ceasefire. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying he will be watching to see whether those documents are rational and realistic. Chanel.
All right, Natalie Brand live for us at the White House. Thank you, Natalie. And now I want to bring in Elizabeth Palmer live for us from London this hour. Liz, European leaders met last week without, notably, Putin and Zelenskyy meeting face to face. And there was a little bit of progress here. Could this call between Presidents Trump and Putin really result in some progress here?
Look, it's possible, but it's certainly far from a sure thing. And it rests on President Putin's intentions. Basically, it's not clear that he is serious about ending the war. You heard the frustration in the words of Vice President Vance. The White House must have serious doubts at this stage. Respected military analysts think that the problem for Putin is that he faces a dangerous political moment for himself and his government once the war comes to an end. Thousands of troops will come back home to Russia. Many of them will have PTSD. They won't be on the big military salaries anymore. And Russians all over the country at that stage will begin asking whether the whole thing was worth it. Well over 250,000 dead and wounded. And of course, their country having become an international pariah. When I was there last week, all I heard from Russians, speaking off the record, is they just want peace. They're not happy with the way things have gone so far.
So, Liz, Middle East Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says, there's an art to these kinds of negotiations. Let's listen.
The art here is to narrow that wide berth between the parties. And I think to some extent we've done that. To some extent, each party is staking out their positions. And I think Monday will go a long way towards identifying where we are and how we complete this negotiation.
So, Elizabeth, just to get some perspective on this, what are the sticking points for each side that have so far prevented a deal from going through?
Well, I think there's just one, basically. Russia's price for peace is too high. We had it spelled out again in the talks in Istanbul, where relatively low-level Russian delegations showed up. But their message was, we want to keep 4 provinces of Ukraine in any settlement, including land that its military hasn't yet taken. In other words, it wants Ukraine to hand over territory that Ukrainian soldiers have been dying to defend. And this is something, obviously, President Zelenskyy won't and can't accept. Even going into this call with President Trump in a little while, the Kremlin is still signaling that it's not budging on that demand. In fact, the spokesman said it would be nice if Russia could get its way by diplomatic means. But the implication there is, even if it doesn't, it's not going to change its demands. It's just going to fight on.
All right, Elizabeth Palmer, live for us in London this hour. Thank you.
Pleasure.